All right. Now, Walt was, as you heard from Sarah, just a master storyteller. He actually used to play out every single character in every one of his films. He'd play it out as a character. He knew every line by heart. And here is with us today for our next segment, our very own Emmy Award-winning Luis Estrada, and he's going to be interviewing his colleague, Dave Mason, who's going to talk to us about his experience basically presenting to live groups, and he's going to share some great tips with us. And starting, I think, with a story. So if you have questions, put them in a chat window and we will get to them after the presentation. Welcome, Luis, and welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hey, so that it's always terrific to see what Sarah comes up with.
Yes.
And also the national thing that the national parks thing as well. But it brings me back because we are in full disclosure, Dave and I also work together on PBS and NPR out of San Diego, and he actually does national shows as well. And so he also has a world, show, actually a show that airs worldwide, right?
Right.
And but I do want to first introduce you, then you can tell us. But I did want to note that what I think Jacques said, or AJ, they were talking about, is all this is basis on telling a great story.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things that you've heard me say before is one of my heroes in overall business, especially in the news business, is Don Hewitt. So Don Hewitt, came up with 60 Minutes, which is the longest running show. And it's been true to telling a great story for decades, right? From day one until now. If you watch last Sunday's show, it's going to be true to that first show, which is really telling a great, thorough story, based on facts and which we really need these days, right? But anyway, the reason we're here today is to, we want to talk to Dave Mason. He has been in the business over 50 years, but don't tell him that. And then he basically, let's hear a little bit about your background and why you're here, because one of the things that, Dave, so we're kind of, because you're probably wondering, what am I doing here? Is because a lot of the folks on this town hall actually have to give a lot of, high impact presentations. Right. So, and they're very important. I mean, they have to talk to very important people in government and other areas as well. And they have to be effective, right? Because not only is there, monetary contracts going on, like you were saying, they basically help companies, help contractors, win contracts with the government. And so with that, you have to be incredibly effective because obviously there's huge amount of very tough competition. So any tips that we want to talk about later on is saying what could make me more effective. And the most effective thing is not standing up and giving a bunch of data, but actually telling a story about the data.
Yes.
And how well you understand it. But anyway, first, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
A broadcaster in more than radio, more than television, in-person appearances, and trying to get my story across to people or an advertiser's story across to people is very important. But way back when I was 12 years old, we had moved to the suburbs and there were 4 radio stations near the suburbs, and a friend and I went to visit one. We got through the back door. They let us in, and this was, there was no such thing as security back then. Oh, absolutely. So we got through the back door and I saw all these people having fun. They were playing the top 40 hits of the day, and they were laughing and smiling and listening to the music. And I thought, this is what I want to do.
You want to be Wolfman Jack?
Well, close, actually. I would sit at home at night and listen to my little radio and dial around. And yes, even in upstate New York, we could hear Wolfman back then. He was on a big station out of Mexico. So I got, well, this is very unique. We also had people selling baby chicks on the radio back then. I mean, the radio itself was so much fun for me, in just that you could, especially AM radio, you could dial around and you could hear things coming from all parts of the country. And I guess the good news is a lot of the stations that I would listen to, I got to work for. There was a station out of Cincinnati, WCKY, which became WSAI, 50,000 watts, massive signal. I got to work there. WLW, I got to work there.
My favorite, K-Earth.
KEarth 101
101.
in Los Angeles, the best FM signal in Los Angeles. Really, it covers Southern California like a blanket. And now I've recently started doing a show on 100,000 watt WTWW with this. Dave Mason, WTWW. It's a station out of Lebanon, Tennessee, and it broadcasts worldwide. And our big message right now, of course, is hope for people of Ukraine. And we're asking people to phone up the station with their messages for people of Ukraine. I mean, this is just amazing. But the one thing we have to do, and by being a music, a disc jockey, basically, even though there's no such thing as a disc anymore, we have to take our stories and file them down into maybe 20 seconds or 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And so this requires a lot of thought to get people to pay attention. And we don't want to bore them. We also know that one of the reasons they're there is to hear the music. So if we can tell the story in a very short amount of time, I think that we win.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Because
Yes.
on my side, which I do my fair share of announcing as well, but really I'm behind the scenes, writing and doing the strategy. And every day it's a challenge to try and get that message, in 20 or 30 seconds.
And I think
And
the key is to focus in on one thing. I was in the store the other day, and I made my purchase, and the clerk behind the counter looks at me, goes, your change is 211. Oh, 211 in progress. I remember Adam 12, and he was remembering the TV show. It just out of the clear blue sky. But I did get to work with Martin Milner here in San Diego a few years ago before he passed away. So it really it meant a lot to me, and I don't even know that he knew that. So sometimes you will hear things, you will see things, you will say things that will affect people like in ways that you don't even know you're affecting people. But this guy just, going back to Adam 12, the old TV show, it's like, wow, how cool is that?
So one of the things that I'm seeing here in the chat is why is storytelling so important, right? And I think it depends on the story as well, correct? I mean, what is the story you want to tell? But just as important as the story is how you tell it, right? Because you work in radio, but you work in television and live as well. So when you're working in those areas and you're telling those stories, and that storytelling is really the most effective way to communicate an idea. And so how do you do that in the different mediums?
I think the one thing to do is, and Nicole asked the question, what makes a story good, which is kind of along the same lines. What makes a story good is knowing your audience, of course, is very good.
Right. And
then relating your own personal experiences to what that audience is about. I spoke once to a group called Telephone Pioneers, and these were people who were back working for phone companies from back in the 30s and 40s. And I think the point that I hit on was, I'd never heard of your company. Your marketing is terrible. So let's do some marketing. And I gave them suggestions on how to market their company. And I thought that was just a good way to reach them, to let them know they want to be heard. They have meetings. They have very, very strong beliefs in what they do.
Yeah. These days, authenticity is huge.
Yes.
I mean, I think for many decades, companies try to sell you an idea or a brand, if you will, around something that's not really relevant. So what I've noticed is sometimes there, but let's see, there's another question. How do you make a story stick? I think that the strength of the story and how you tell it is what I would say. What would you think? I'd say that is like, we were talking about Disney, right? He told stories through animation, which in long form that people weren't doing. And what he did is he cornered the market at animation during that time, because the way he was telling the story was so relevant to so many people. And so the way you tell the story, I feel is really, really important. What do you think?
I think the important thing, and Walt Disney was obviously a genius at doing this, is to do it in a way that people will latch on to. For instance, you're telling a story about a steamboat captain, only it's a mouse. That sticks. That obviously sticks. So, boiling it down to its simple common denominator for people like me who will say, well, look at this mouse is driving the steamboat. How cool is that? And he loves what he's doing. And that's the beauty of Disney, because he took a lot of things that he called it the plausible impossible. There's no way.
And also the technology.
Yes.
Is basically what he did.
Yes.
Is he gave it sound, and it was actually synced up to his whistle. And so that was so amazing that for audiences as well. So It's the story itself. It's the way you tell the story, the way you present it. And I think for any presentation, for any story, really, if you're sitting in front of 3 5-star generals trying to tell your story of your company and the story of the services that you have, or your ability to build equipment or whatnot, I mean, to put it in a story form could be very impactful for even folks like that, because they want to understand you, but they also want to trust you. And really, you're the person that needs to convince them we're the team, because they could probably, I would have to think there's some companies can do the job better than others. But at the end of the day, I think they can all probably get it done. The idea is, who do I want to work with? Right. If you tell a great story, then guess what? I mean, I like the way you presented it. So we were going to do that. Let's see if there's any other questions. There was one I thought we missed. What makes a story good? Let's see. Should we avoid the negative? What importance does it have? Is it interesting? You told a story earlier when we were talking about 9/11. Why don't you tell that story? Because
I was on the air the morning that 9/11 happened, and I had a traffic reporter. She was in a different room. Actually, she was in a different building, but she came over the intercom and she said, "We think a small plane is at the World Trade Center." So we had the ability of listening to ABC News just in the studio. It wasn't on the air yet. And I punched up ABC and I'm listening to a gentleman talking to one of the anchors on the phone. When the second plane hit the World Trade Center, I realized this is so much bigger than a small plane hitting the World Trade Center. So I immediately turned over the coverage, obviously, to ABC, because they knew exactly what was going on. I was also on the air last Saturday in Buffalo, which we can do now. Technology has made it possible, when they had the mass shooting there. So it was obvious that we had to stop what we were doing, stop being, happy and joyful, and really just say, okay, something very serious has happened, and we have to turn over our coverage. Is that a negative? I don't think so. I think things like this are so important to the world. They're so important to people when something like this happens, whether it's 9/11 or whether it's a wildfire like we experienced in San Diego, or whether it's a mass shooting. People really want to know what's going on, and we have to get that story to them. Is it negative? I don't think so.
It's a service at the end of the day. I mean, especially the broadcasting side, not so much the streaming. I mean, these are licenses you get from the government, right, to be a broadcast. And number one rule is you got to serve the community. So in presentations and those things, I think I would say if something is construed or seen as negative, I would put it in context. If you have to factually say, oh, this didn't work or something like that, I think as long as you're honest, and then again, tell it in a way, in a story way, tell the story of why this particular thing is not the best, right? Or not so great. Let's see, what storytelling tips, especially when you're live, Dave, like you are now.
I have just my favorite tip, which is not a trick at all, is just to talk to one person. For now, I'm looking at my camera. My camera is the person. And when I talk to that person, I'm talking to you and you alone. The other people in the room, the other people who are online, they're really, if they're paying attention to this, then I'm talking to you. If they're not, then they're off doing something else. So they're not paying attention to me. And I think that's the one thing, is to remember that you are talking to one person, whether you're live, whether you're in the media, on television or on radio,
right,
or on the phone. You talk to one person and use the term you frequently when I'm talking to you, not you all, not all of you. Sorry, Rush Limbaugh. That's what he used. It's a term he used a lot. But I'm talking to you. Luis, I'm talking to you.
Yeah. And at the same time, you're talking to other people.
Yes, I know. Well, I'm talking to Darren. I'm talking to Nicole. I'm talking to Sophia. I'm talking to you, Sophia.
I'm talking to you.
Yeah. Listen to me now. Oh, yeah.
Bag of tricks. There you go. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, right? In any situation. I think, who used to do that? I heard, of course, I've never got to meet her, but Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis with people that knew her and had talked to her. Though she had this amazing way, and I've heard this because I didn't experience myself, but I've heard it from several people, is that when didn't matter who you were, if you were talking to her, she was listening to you. She was zoned in on you. And this is obviously one of the most iconic people in the world, but that's the way she was, is if she was talking to you, she was talking to you. And she was zoning everything else out. So communicating whatever it was you were talking about.
I think that's really important, is to, you also have to listen as well as speak.
Exactly.
And in a lot of cases, you can try and put yourself in the position of your listener and just say, how does this listener want to perceive what I'm saying? And I think that helps a lot too.
Here's one that I think might be a hint. Have you ever been listening to someone else tell a story that drags on and on? What do you do?
Fall asleep.
You stop. What do you? Is that a hint, or is that really something you want to know?
It's probably not a good hint. No, there are people who do that.
Dave. Now, Dave, I'm gonna confess for you. We've been on the air live, and Dave, for whatever reason, missed his cue. And he keeps talking, and we're like, they cut away. They're gone.
You have to.
And then afterwards, hey, Dave, you can stop now. We cut away 10 minutes ago. No.
Well, and again, working in the remote situation, it's a little different than being in the studio. Being in the studio, you've got people that are around giving you, hand signals and cues and timing and all that. And when we're doing this, a lot of times you're lost. And I'll admit it, I get lost.
And this is the setup, so you guys know. I mean, this is the setup. People are going live from their homes, and this is a setup. I mean, this is a setup that we use to go live for KPBS Radio NPR in San Diego. So we're actually doing exactly the same thing through Zoom. And you got the technical director trying to get people's attention, right? Because you're so involved in the script and the story you're telling and all these things, and she's like, "Oh well, no, God,
There are the two things that someone said. Who's your favorite storyteller? And actually, there were two in my life. As a youngster, I used to listen to Gene Shepherd. Gene is also the narrator of The Christmas Story, and he was just wonderful. And of course, Paul Harvey. Those are two.
Good day.
Broadcasting icons who could tell the story like no one else.
All right. Well, with that said, thank you very much, Dave, for being here, for telling the stories. It was great listening. And now we're going to toss it back to Jacques and AJ. Thanks, guys.
Stay on. I have a question for you. Yeah.
Okay.
And so Louise, and this is a question for both of you, but Louise, you remember when we were hired by one of our very great clients to produce and direct an hour-long video, right?
Yes.
For their government client, right? As part of a proposal effort. So, how do you? So stories have to be short, right? How did, when you were thinking through producing and directing that, how were you able to stitch together an entire hour-long that captivated the audience?
Well, it was a group effort, and one of the things that was a challenge there is that the folks that were working with us, there was this whole debate about using the teleprompter. Right? Because you guys probably remember that. No names will be mentioned, court of law, but the idea is you use the tools that you have, but also teleprompters are there as a guide. But also, that's when you write a script, it actually gives you an idea of how long it's going to be, right? So you get an idea. I mean, you could see a 20-second script versus a 10 versus a 2-hour show. And so we write all of those. So the way that you do there is you really work on the script to get all of the ideas there, and then you edit it down, and then you work with whoever's going to say it to put it in their vernacular, in their style, right? And then that way it comes off very natural and very authentic. Because if you try to just kind of put it up and read, and Dave knows this, I mean, he's been put on the spot. The way we do auditions for people is we put up the teleprompters. They come in and read it. And if they either read it very naturally or they actually just read it.
Right.
And Dave is one of those that we've done it to him before. Our producers sometimes are a little late, and we're on live, and he's never seen the script before, but it looks like he's read it all his life. because it's a guide. And I think with that particular project, there was a lot of information. We actually had to cut it down.
Mm.
So we had a lot of information, a lot of technical information, historic information. And so we had to really work with them to cut it down, to put it within the hour. But we used the hour. I mean, we used the hour.
Yeah, wonderful. It was a wonderful piece. And Dave, it's so great to meet you.
Absolutely.
Likewise.
I think
Thank
when
you.
we're going to help the next company win the 6th generation fighter aircraft, we're going to hire the two of you first to figure out what the story's going to be.
Yeah, exactly right.
There you go.
Well, we'd have to fly the aircraft first.
We can make that happen.
We can make
Okay,
that happen.
good,
Well,
good.
maybe. Maybe a simulator.
Right.
A simulator.
Right
There
in
you
it,
go.
yeah.
That's exactly where I was going with
Right.
that.
That's
And I know
amazing.
that a couple of us are going to have to tell stories next week at
We are.
Dallas, big conference. And I'm going to remember your tip. Just think about telling the story to one person in
One
the
person.
audience, right? Did I get that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now pick out one person, just speak to that person and just make it just myself and that person. I heard the same thing, by the way, Louise, of
Yeah.
President Clinton, that when you were in the room, a big room with President Clinton, and you were speaking to him, you felt you were the only person he was speaking to.
That's
I
great.
heard the
It's
same thing.
definitely a
Yeah.
big talent. And I think, and there's a lot of sincerity behind it too,
Mm.
which is really what makes that work, is that you're sincere and you're authentic, and people really relate to that. So
And I think that's something for all of us to try to do a good job at, right? It's
Absolutely.
important in everyday life, even when you're speaking to an individual, you should be speaking to an individual as though they're the only person that, you've got their attention, right?
exactly.
Great.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
We'd love to have both of you back on again.
Yeah,
There's
you
so
were-
much
you were
more
great.
about storytelling.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. See you tomorrow.